Well, we begin in Geneva, where a meeting of powerful foreign ministers has been taking place for the past several hours. They're trying to end the standoff over Iran's nuclear program, and all signs show they're making good progress. Western powers say they may be willing to ease sanctions if Iran scales back the enrichment of uranium. Well, our correspondents are covering all sides of the story. Soraya Leni is live for us in the Iranian capital. We've got Mike Hanna standing by in Jerusalem, and of course Simon McGregor-Wood watching events unfolding in Geneva. Let's start with Simon then. Geneva, a very popular place right now with foreign ministers. What's going on there, Simon?
Well, the gathering of the big guns, Sammy, that's right. The French foreign minister, the German foreign minister have already arrived. They've gone into the hotel of choice for these sorts of meetings, the Intercontinental Hotel. We're expecting John Kerry and William Hague in the next few hours. All here, we understand, because this deal, this first step deal, in which Iran will, in some measure, curtail its uranium enrichment and open its program up for some degree of transparency and inspection, is close to fruition. We're not there yet. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office from London has just released a statement saying that the talks are at a serious point, a real opportunity, but a lot still needs to be done. That reflects the comments coming from most of the foreign ministries today. It's close, but we're not there yet. Catherine Ashton, the EU's High Representative, who's been sort of leading the talks so far on behalf of the international community, she and the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Zarif, have, we understand now, just sat down for their first meeting of the day at the United Nations headquarters. That meeting, I'm sure, during the course of the afternoon will broaden out to include Mr. Kerry and the other foreign ministers as and when they are invited into that process.
Now, Simon, I don't want you to look too deeply into your crystal ball, but from the signals coming out of diplomats there, does it look like the P5+1 are basically looking or heading in the direction of a situation where they can live with a degree of Iranian uranium enrichment?
Well, that's what the Iranians are saying is a red line. And as far as we can understand from the hints and the leaks and the tweets and what have you, thus far, this first step, it is only a first step, will ask them to reduce the level of enrichment and the quantity of enrichment, but it won't necessarily ask them yet to start dismantling any of the capability. That perhaps might wait for the grand bargain, which will happen when the final negotiations are concluded. And we understand that the period, ideally, between this first step, this confidence building step, and the last stage will be about 6 months, all being well.
All right, let's thank Simon McGregor-Wood for us in Geneva. Let's continue this discussion now. Soraya Leni, as I mentioned, in the Iranian capital. How is all this being viewed and going down in Tehran, Soraya?
Well, for the first time in about 10 years, there's actually optimism here towards these talks, and perhaps there'll be some kind of resolution. That's how Iranians see it. For the first time in a decade, really, a reason to be hopeful. But it's very cautious, optimistic. Their hopes have been dashed many times before, of course, on the diplomatic track and on the technical track, too. There's obviously two-track negotiations to solve this nuclear crisis, as it were. So yes, as I said, hopeful, cautious optimism here in Tehran. We really will get a better picture, of course, in the coming hours. And Saturday morning, it is Friday afternoon here in Tehran. It's the end of the weekend. Saturday morning, we'll have a better idea, the start of the working week, just how people view what's gone on in the last 48 hours, if indeed a deal is reached, of course, and how Iranians on the street will view that deal.
All right, thanks so much, Soraya Leni. Now let's go to Mike Hanna in Jerusalem. Hopeful, optimism, that might describe the situation in Tehran, but it doesn't really fit with what we're hearing from Israel's Prime Minister, does it, Mike?
No, certainly not. We know that there is still not a deal on the table. We don't know the details of what will be discussed in the course of the day. But the Israeli Prime Minister seems to know it all. He says that it is a bad deal. He says that any agreement will be one of the great historical mistakes. These comments coming after a morning meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, his third meeting with Kerry in the past 3 days. Kerry on his way unexpectedly to join all the Western ministers in Geneva, the US Secretary of State having been in the region in order to galvanize the Palestinian-Israeli talks process. Not much success there, and certainly there was a great deal of anger from sectors of Israeli society with some of the blunt statements the US Secretary of State made. And then, of course, this issue of Iran. From the very beginning, it was clear that there was a great deal of daylight between the positions of the US Secretary of State and the Israeli Prime Minister. And shortly after John Kerry left the area, this is what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
I understand the Iranians are walking around very satisfied in Geneva, as well they should be, because they got everything and paid nothing, everything they wanted. They wanted relief of sanctions after years of a grueling sanctions regime. They got that. They're paying nothing because they're not reducing in any way their nuclear enrichment capability. So Iran got the deal of the century, and the international community got a bad deal. This is a very bad deal.
And Mike, here's an interesting quote in Reuters news agency attributed to Netanyahu, saying that the deal buries the possibility of having a peaceful resolution. Sounds like Israel saying a deal might make conflict more likely.
Well, indeed, yes. That's the not-so-subtle tone of the Israeli Prime Minister. He said repeatedly that if Israel at any stage feels under threat, it reserves to take whatever whatever action it needs to protect itself. He is continuing to speak as strongly as this. But interestingly, too, he's attempting to include the whole region in Israel's position. He said in the course of the morning, too, that this is a position shared by others in the region. Well, we contacted the Prime Minister's office and said, who are you referring to? The answer was it would not be diplomatic to answer. But clearly what we do know is that Saudi Arabia, which has been one of the places visited in the past few days by the US Secretary of State, also opposed to the easing of sanctions against Iran. So in this particular point, you've got Israel and Saudi Arabia in a very rare occasion of being on exactly the same page when it comes to resistance to the deal being discussed in Geneva. The Israeli Prime Minister making very clear that he will not accept it, and making clear that he and his country reserve the right to take action should they deem it necessary.
All right, Mike Hanna, thanks for that in Jerusalem.